Hey, welcome to Open Door Biker Church, everybody. It is great to see you guys there. I know we've got a few that aren't here because there's some illness running around out there. Our thoughts and prayers are with those guys. I know it's not any fun to be sick, especially when it's extremely hot outside like it is. It's no fun at all. So, hey, for the last few weeks, we've been looking at spiritual warfare. So we're going to continue to look at that. We're going to be based in tonight. We're going to be in Joshua in the first chapter. We'll be in verse 7 through 9 is going to be our base. So if you want to turn to that while we're getting in here and getting settled. Glad that you're here. Glad that you're tuning in online. If you're watching us there, that's awesome. Once again, I want to just thank you guys for your prayer support, your financial support. It goes a long way. When you're praying for us, we can feel it. We know as a body that you're doing it, and we appreciate it. We really do. Now, this past week, in case you didn't notice, this past week was the 4th of July. And we did celebrate Independence Day, our independence from Great Britain, this past week. Now, like I said, we've been looking at spiritual warfare over the last few weeks and the different aspects of spiritual warfare. And we've looked at how trickery is a part of war and how Satan uses trickery against us as we're out in this spiritual battle that we participate in. And we've looked at how preparation is critical. It's very, very critical for us to be prepared for war, prepared for what we face out there. But tonight, let's kind of look at what happens when the heat gets turned up on us. When the heat gets turned up, what do we do? When the bullets start flying out there and the bombs start exploding, the spiritual bullets, the spiritual bombs, when they start going off, what do we do? What's that look like? I'm going to start with a story about a woman. Her name was Mary Hayes. Now, any historians out there watching or in the building that might be thinking, that name sounds familiar. Well, for the most part, for most of us, that name's not going to be familiar. But if it does, if it's going off, setting a bell off in the back of your head and you can't quite picture it, Mary Hayes was married to a fellow named William Hayes, who was a barber in Pennsylvania in the colonial time period. And he actually joined the Continental Army when it came time for independence. When we signed the Declaration of Independence, he was part of the Continental Army. He was part of the 4th Pennsylvania Artillery. Now, like a lot of soldiers' wives at the time, Mary followed her husband to camp. She followed him to the campaigns, the battles. She followed him like a lot of the wives did at the time. Not surprising, a fledgling country had a little trouble sometimes getting the paychecks out to the soldiers. There was more promise than it was pay sometimes. And to make ends meet, Mary did like a lot of wives that were following the camp. She did odd jobs to try to make ends meet, to help provide for the two of them. And one of the things that she did was the pretty mundane task of washing clothes and sheets and linens and that kind of thing. The men in the company called her Molly. Now, that's a common nickname for somebody that's named Mary, which is something I've never really understood, why you would nickname somebody a nickname with 5 letters when their actual name only has 4, but that's beside the point. But her nickname was Molly. And because she carried these big buckets of water back and forth to do the laundry, the men also called her Pitcher of water. History has gone on to know her as Molly Pitcher. Now, if that name's still not ringing a real bell with you, you've probably seen a painting that depicts her, that shows her at the head of a cannon, at the barrel, with a rammer ramming around home in the cannon in the middle of a battle in a dress. She's ramming this round home in the cannon. What had happened was on June 28th, 1776, William, her husband, who was manning that position on that battery, was wounded at the Battle of Monmouth. He was wounded, so Mary, seeing what had happened, she makes the decision to step in and take his place at this artillery piece. Now, she wasn't really prepared for that, but she'd been watching her husband drill at Valley Forge for months. And she had a pretty good idea, a pretty good understanding of the basics of how this system worked and what he was doing. So she jumped in and took his place. Now, soldier and diarist Joseph Plum Martin, he attested to her valor. He wrote in his journal, he wrote, "A cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs without doing any other damage than carrying away all of the lower part of her petticoat." Wow. She's in battle, and she's so involved in the battle that a cannonball passes right between her legs. But she never slows down. She keeps working that cannon. She keeps ramming the shot. Her action, her stepping forward, her abilities caught the attention of George Washington. He saw her. He realized what she was doing. He was so pleased with her performance that he actually awarded her the rank of sergeant. Her participation was so well documented that the War Department, when pensions were granted her a pension as a sergeant in the Continental Army. See, Molly was never trained for war. She wasn't ready for war, but she'd been paying attention, and she jumped in when she was needed. Our verse for tonight, it says this, it says, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Molly was paying attention. Strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. She jumped right in the fray with no formal training. But not only did she have no formal training, was she willing to go into the fray, go into the battle, but really she had the ability to flee if she wanted to. She could have run away and nobody would have thought anything about it. Had it been you, would you have jumped into the fray? Would you have jumped into the battle? When you see a fellow soldier in Christ stumble, do you know what to do? When you see a fellow Christian that's struggling in the battle, in the spiritual war, does your training kick in? Would you jump into the battle? Or would fear bring you to a standstill? Would the fear of what you don't know stop you? You know, when they came to arrest Jesus that night, all of his followers ran away. They all ran. Could there have been anyone anywhere that should have been better prepared for an attack by the enemy than the disciples? They just spent 3 years with Jesus, but they ran away. Peter, who was brave enough to kind of come back, when confronted with being one of his followers, he completely disowned Christ. I don't know him. You're mistaken. No, it's not me. I don't know him. Would you have been brave enough to stand your ground even when the armies of the enemy are advancing? When Satan sends his demons against you, would you be brave enough to stand your ground? Stand up for Christ. And you're at that bike night, and someone says, "Oh, there's one of those Christians." Do you stand your ground? Or do you duck your head? Do you stand your ground or do you retreat? The bravery, the courage that comes and you stand your ground, where does that come from? You know, last week we celebrated our Independence Day, but it was also the anniversary of something else. It was the 161st anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. On June 3rd, 1863, it's considered to be basically the high point of the war, the turning point of the war. Many scholars call it the high tide of the Confederacy. See, on that day, in a little town called Gettysburg in Pennsylvania, more than 20,000 Southern men marched a mile or more across an open field to attack an entrenched federal force. One of the groups of men in this march was the 8th Virginia Infantry. They marched that day a little over a mile. When they started their march, there were 208 men in the 4th Virginia, or 8th Virginia, 208 men. And they marched. As they started out, they were exposed to long-range cannon fire. It did some damage, but not a lot. They got about halfway across the mile that they had to march, and they came across a house that was in the middle of the battlefield, and they had to go around it. So it confused their lines somewhat. It messed them up. But they came back together on the other side of the house, and when they came back together on the other side of the house, they found themselves within range of accurate rifle fire, long-range rifle fire. They began to lose men to the rifles. As it got closer, they were exposed to canister fire from the cannons. If you're not familiar with canister fire, it's been described as a big shotgun. It's a round that goes into a cannon. Inside that round are 27 iron balls. Those iron balls are 1.5 inches in diameter. 27 of them were fired at one time into a group of men. It shreds them. As they get closer, they're exposed to double canister fire. 2 rounds packed into the cannon at the same time and fired. The color bearer of the 8th Virginia was shot and killed. And another member picked up the color, the standard, the flag, and advanced it. And he was shot. There were so many color bearers shot before they reached the point they could go no further. There was no one left to pick up the flag and carry it. No one left to pick up the standard. After the battle, Federal forces walked out onto the battlefield and picked up the standard, the flag. There was no one left to take it back. When it was all said and done, 39 members of that infantry unit were killed, 79 were wounded, 60 were captured, 178 out of 208 didn't return. That's 86% of those men that went out on that battlefield that day did not return. 30 men returned after that fight was done. Where does that kind of courage come from? The courage to keep going. Where does that come from? For some of those men, it came from the knowledge that God had fixed the time of their death. And to them, it didn't matter what they were doing or where they were. When it was time to go home, the Lord would call them home and it wouldn't matter. That was where some of them found their courage. But for most of those men, that kind of courage came from love. It came from the love that they had for the men that they served with, the commanders that they followed. It came from the devotion they had to those men, their friends. It started with love. When Jesus was marched through the streets of Jerusalem, carrying his cross on his back, it was love that kept him there. When Jesus was beaten to a pulp, it was love that kept him from speaking the soldiers that did it out of existence. When they nailed him to that cross, it was love that held him there. It was love that raised him from the dead. It was the love for you and me. It was the love that put the whole thing in motion. So when the battle gets hot, what's going to keep you going? What will keep you moving forward when things go terribly wrong? Will it be the time you spent studying the Bible? Will it be your sense of duty to God? Or will it be the love you have for the people you serve with? Will it be the love you have for your brothers and sisters? During what we know as Black Hawk Down, the Battle of Mogadishu, Jeff Struecker tells a story that as he came back and was getting ready to go back out after the first attack, he was cleaning the Humvees, washing the blood out of them. One of his men comes to him and tells him, "Sergeant, there's no way I can go back out there. If I go back out there, I'm going to die. I can't go back out." Struecker had a couple of choices to him. He could order the soldier to go back out because that was what he was supposed to do, or he could tell him he could stay there. Struecker told him he didn't have to go back out, but that they were going back out. They were going back out because men were left in the city. Men were in the city that were left and lost, and they needed to go get them. They were hurt. Mike Durant's chopper had crashed, and they didn't know exactly where it was, but they were going back out to get him. He told him, he said, "You can stay here, but our friends need us. People that you don't even know need you because they're lost in the city, and they're hurt, they're injured, and we need to go get them and bring them back." He says as they got ready to go back out, he was checking the men, and in the very back, in the very last Humvee going back out, was this private that he had been talking to. He'd made the decision to go back out. He was there with his squad automatic weapon, ready to go. He was out all night with them, fought hard with them. He came back the next day. It was the love for his fellow soldiers that sent him back out. If you serve Jesus as your Lord and Savior, then it should be your prayer that He changes your heart to be more like His heart. And His heart is full of love. Love for the very people who say He isn't who He says He is. Love for those who go out of their way to tell everyone who will listen, He's just a myth. He's not real. Love for the people who say it's just somebody that we conjured up to make us feel better about life. It's His love for those people that held Him on the cross. So when you feel like going to that bike night isn't something you really want to do, so when you feel like going to that bike night is just something you can't do, when you think that bike rally is just too far away, when you think, I don't have time to stop and share the good news with that guy there, it's those times that love that Jesus has for us should be flowing out of us and giving us strength to keep going. It should be those times that He's given us the courage to pick up the standard of Christ when our brother can't go on. It should be those times when we keep moving forward in the spiritual war, driving. Keep moving, keep picking up the banner until there's no one left to pick up the banner. Because the great thing for us is that when we're so tired that we feel like we've got nothing left to give, when we're at that point, then we can fall back on the promise of Philippians 4:13. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. We can rest assured in the fact that God will give us what we need to keep going. That God will keep us strengthened and moving forward. Now, there's another aspect to this war, the spiritual war, that we have to be prepared for. It may come as a surprise to you, but the other aspect that we need to be prepared for is forgiveness. We have to be ready to forgive people. And that's very hard for some of us to do. It's very hard for some of us to forgive. We say forgive, but do we really? Are we ready to forgive? I know people that this is a real sticking point for them. They're concerned that people who have been convicted of murder can go to heaven. It upsets them to think that people like Jeffrey Dahmer or David Berkowitz, son of Sam, can come to a saving knowledge of Jesus and be in the same heaven as me and you. Maybe you have a problem with this. I don't know. We stand behind our idea of fairness and say, they only converted, they only gave their heart to Christ because they're stuck in prison and they're going to die. They don't have anything to show that they truly are repentant. These are the same people that have trouble with the idea of a deathbed conversion. That at the last moment of your life, you can give your life to Christ and be in heaven with Him. You know, the most famous deathbed conversion is the thief on the cross. He turned to Jesus and said, "Remember me," acknowledging who He was. Jesus didn't tell him, "Too late. Wish you'd have thought about that sooner." He didn't go there. And He didn't cause him to somehow come down off the cross and go out and show everybody that he'd been changed. Jesus just looked at him and said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." The problem that we have with this isn't the idea of fairness. It's not fairness at all. It's forgiveness. We think that we should be able to see people who do wrong be punished. And we have it in our minds that we think that it should happen. We're disappointed when we don't see the punishment. We're disappointed at the idea of them being able to go to heaven. And the closer the offense is to us, the more we want to see justice done. It's been a busy few weeks in the idea of history in our country. Independence Day, Gettysburg. Just a few weeks ago, we also recognized and remembered the D-Day invasion, the invasion of Normandy, considered to be a major turning point in World War II. Hundreds of thousands of men crossed the English Channel and landed in Normandy, France. One of those men was a fellow named David Silva. He was 19 years old when he landed on the beach at Normandy. At Omaha Beach, he landed with the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Division. Upon reaching the sand, he was hit 3 times in the chest by a machine gun that was up on top of a bluff. At the same time that Silva was hit, 21-year-old Henrik Servalov was serving with the 352nd Infantry Division in the German Army, and he was manning his MG-42 machine gun in the same sector that Silva was on. As the day progressed, the Allies overtook the beachhead. Henrik was captured and became a prisoner of war. In the mid-1960s, Silva was contacted by Henrik after he found Silva's name listed in the book The Longest Day as one of the survivors of the Easy Red sector, Omaha Beach. Both men met in Germany, and after sharing the details of that day with each other, Henrik realized that he was the one that shot Silva on that beach that day. 60 years after, the two of them met face to face on Omaha Beach, returning to the same place they had been in 1944. They shook hands. Forgiveness was offered. Forgiveness was accepted. Silva said, "I forgave him, even though he didn't want me to." I think he really needed this. He was hurting a lot. Henrik said, "There was no glory on the beach that day, just a lot of blood, screams, and young men dying. With Silva, you can apologize. The others who died out there, you can no longer apologize to. I visit them at the cemetery. We were all boys." See, sometimes it's not a matter of whether you feel forgiveness is warranted. It doesn't even matter if you think forgiveness should be given. Sometimes forgiveness from you is needed. The hardest thing for most of us to forgive is someone we feel like's persecuted us. Someone who ran us down for our beliefs. Someone who mocks the God that we serve, the God that we trust in. And we shun these people, even when they profess to trust and love Jesus. We say things like, "Oh, I'll believe it when I see it," as if they have something to prove to us. Christ, hanging on that cross, called out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." These soldiers that beat him, these soldiers that paraded him through the streets, these soldiers that nailed him to a wooden cross and then stood around waiting for him to die. Jesus had done nothing to deserve that kind of treatment, but he intervened on their behalf. On the behalf of these soldiers, these men, he asked God the Father to forgive them. Dave Silva forgave the man who shot him 3 times in the chest. He didn't have to. Henrik wasn't asking for it, but he forgave him. Does Satan have you convinced that someone in your life isn't worth forgiveness? Has he used this tactic on you? Has he twisted up your thought process to where you think someone doesn't deserve forgiveness? Is it your boss? Did he pass you over for a promotion because you let everybody know that you love Jesus? Is it your parents? Perhaps they weren't as supportive as you thought they should be. Was it something that they did when you were growing up and you don't want to forgive it? Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe they don't treat you the way you think you should be treated. Maybe you hold things against your spouse. Maybe it's your former spouse. Maybe it's your ex-spouse. Maybe that person did some things that you feel like just are not forgivable. Here it is, though. Search your heart today. Give forgiveness just like Jesus did, and he does. I'm so glad he doesn't withhold his forgiveness from me, because I find that I need it over and over again. Lord, I just thank you that we're able to come today. I thank you for the fact that you forgive us. I thank you for the fact that you support us, that you strengthen us in this battle that we fight, that you guide us in the way you would have us to be, the way you'd have us to go. Lord, I just pray as we go out this week that you keep us focused and strong. As people say things and do things around us that we take offense to, that we forgive, that you put it on our hearts to forgive. And we do it freely. We do it because it's the right thing to do. It's what you would do. Lord, continue to change our hearts to be just like yours. Lord, we love you, and we want to emulate you in everything that we do. Keep us safe this week. Keep us moving forward. In your name I ask this. Amen.